for those that, I hope this isn't a shock for anyone, but this is season 3, episode 2 of the Enteric Disease Investigator Collab. My name is Brenna Garrett. I'm the Waterborne Disease Coordinator here at ADHS. And today's topic was going to be on rare diseases. And we're going to have a lovely guest speaker, ADHS's very own Mackenzie Toole. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things. Just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of the interface and Zoom, and hopefully everyone can hear, and we'll go ahead and do introductions in a second. But everyone looks like they're getting on board, so that's good. Thank you to everyone who's turned in their case presentations. If you have any you still want to, go ahead and send them to the food team, but we do have a good majority now, so thank you for those of you that did that. One other thing I wanted to mention is that there are going to be some Zoom tech support office hours tomorrow, I believe, from 9 to 10 Phoenix time. So if anybody needs more information about that, please contact the food team and we can get you that information. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing attendance roll call, and I'm just going to go pick at random. But today's icebreaker question is, if you were to live in any sitcom or TV show, what would you choose and why? So again, my name is Brenna. I work here at ADHS as part of the Food and Water team, and I would probably say the sitcom I would live in is Full House, the show from the 90s, just because, you know, it was 30 minutes and there was a life lesson in every episode, and it was done in 30 minutes. What more could you want for? So we'll go with Caitlin next. Caitlin? Oh.
Yeah, sorry, just unmuting myself. Hi guys, I'm Caitlin. I'm one of the foodborne EPIs here at ADHS. So I actually don't really watch a lot of TV and never really have. But the one show that I've managed to stay loyal to is Grey's Anatomy. It's my guilty pleasure. So I guess I would love to live in that show, but not be killed off in a plane or a bomb or any of those crazy things.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Caitlin. Ashley, we'll hear from you.
Hello, everyone. Ashley, serving as your tech support. And so did you say 90s sitcom?
Any sitcom.
Any sitcom? You know what? I'm going to go with Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Yeah, that was a pretty great show. So
excellent. All right, Debbie. Debbie, I think you're.
Yeah. Hello. I'm going to be different and say Friends. They had a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Mary Lee.
So I am Mary Lee Kellis. I'm the outbreak epidemiologist here at ADHS. And I have to admit, there's this TV show called Phineas and Ferb. And my children have compared me to Dr. Doofenshmirtz multiple times. So apparently that's the one that I would be in if I were in a TV show or a sitcom.
Okay, thanks, Mary Lee. Let's go to Lisa.
I would have to say Gilligans Island. I've always wanted to live on an island, and not having a boat would not be a problem. So it'd be a lot of fun, very relaxing and very quiet.
Perfect, thank you. Martha.
Hey guys, Martha here from Cochise County Health Department. I'm the epidemiologist here. So I would love to be part of like the Saved by the Bell gang, you know. I would definitely be dating Zach Morrison, I think.
Perfect.
Okay.
Excellent. No, I like it. I appreciate that honesty. It says Anna, but I think it's a group of you all.
Yes, hi, can you hear us?
Yes, good.
Okay, my name is Anna, and I'm with Maricopa County Department of Public Health as a communicable disease investigator. I were to live on a show, it'd probably be House.
Yeah. No, I don't have one. Hi, my name is Kayla. I'm one of the disease surveillance nurses, and I cannot think of a sitcom that I would like to be a part of, but I do like Full House.
Perfect.
I'm Katie. I'm one of the other nurses here at Maricopa County. And one of the nurses here had suggested The Walking Dead, and that would be an interesting sitcom to be on.
That's a very extreme one. So yeah, that's good. I hope your survival skills are on point. Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica. I'm the epidemiologist here at University of Arizona, and I run the Safer Lab. If I was on a sitcom, I think it's a pick between Friends or Lost.
Okay, excellent. Nick.
Hey everybody. I think Erica and Debbie stole my Friends. I've always wanted to hang out in coffee shops and for no good reason have a nice apartment.
Yes, and not just a nice apartment, like a pretty big apartment for New York. Like what? That's what I imagine anyway. Ginny.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ginny, and I'm a disease investigator for ADHS in Maricopa County. I'm not very creative, and I'm going to say Full House, and mostly because I used to watch more TV back then than I do now, and I had such good memories of watching that show as a kid. And like Brenna said, there's always a life lesson, and it was kind of like, you know, the model of like a perfect family that even though they had struggles, eventually got along. So really enjoyed that when I was younger.
Great. Yuma County.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alicia Gonzalez. I'm a public health nurse. I think the show that I would choose to be in, that I'm actually watching again, The Office.
Yes.
It's hilarious.
Hi, my name is Mireya Lopez. I'm a nurse here at Public Health Nurse, and I'm into Walking Dead. I like the suspense. I like the thrill.
Your life would never be boring on The Walking Dead. I'll just say that. So yeah. Let's go Coconino County. Sorry, I made them work for it.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's awkwardly unmuted. I'm Celia. I am the Communicable Disease Associate at Coconino County. And I think I'm going to go with Friends as well for the TV show I want to be on.
I'm Jonica. I'm the Communicable Disease Admin here at Coconino County, and I'm going to go with Full House because I'm an only child and I always wanted to be a part of a big family, so I think that'd be fun.
I should have kept a tally sheet of who we had Friends versus Full House. That seems to be the theme right now. And Walking Dead. We'll throw that in there. Elizabeth Anton? Elizabeth, you're on mute. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, all right. So I'm a communicable disease nurse here at Gila River Tribal Health Department, and Jimmy Orozco is with me. He's our communicable disease investigator. And so I'm into Western, so it would be a toss-up between Bonanza and Gunsmoke of a show that I'd like to be on, riding horses and, you know, taking care of cows.
And I'm a Jimmy Orozco. I'm a CDI, as she said. I'm going to go with Big Bang Theory.
Okay, excellent. Lots of nods. Mackenzie.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie. I'm a foodborne epi at ADHS. So everybody here who knows me knows that I love the show The Bachelor and Bachelorette, and I don't belong on the show in any way. but I think I would want to be on it just so that I could laugh at everyone and also be one of the very few women who has a personality on there. But I probably wouldn't make it very far.
It's that dang personality that would get in the way. I think it looks like Siona Willie. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Siona Willie. I'm the Director of Public Health Nursing here at Salem Medical Center in Fort Defiance, Arizona. Oh, golly gee. Gilligans Island. Yeah, that would be fun. When I get real bored of that, then I would do Mork and Mindy or Happy Days. Westerns are comedy, but I love Westerns too. But yeah, comedy. Yeah, those.
Perfect. Thank you. And then Edwin, I think you're on the phone.
Oh, actually, two people have already. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wow, that was a delay. Edwin, Navajo County Epi. Two people have already stolen mine, and that's Gilligans Island because I'm a big beachgoer. But since I think the other show I would like to be on would be Baywatch. And contrary to what Mackenzie thinks, I think her being on The Bachelor would be an amazing show. And even though I don't regularly watch it, I would watch that one with her on it. So definitely.
You know, I don't know many people that would complain about Mackenzie being on The Bachelor either. So, all right. And then I do see that we maybe have a call-in user. Is there anybody else on the phone that I missed? Well, if not, feel free to just jump in and stop us anyway. But it looks like that's it. So I think now we're going to jump into our fabulous guest speaker who's going to talk about all things rare disease.
Hey, Brenna, can I just interject really quickly? Coconino County, do we have you labeled properly? I want to make sure we know who's with you, and it looks like someone else joined. It's hard to see for sure. Sorry, now I'm going to make you get up. You're going to get your exercise.
Yeah, we do have Mary Ellen here. Hello.
Okay, great. So Jonica, Celia, and Mary Ellen.
Uh-huh.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you guys. Sorry to make you walk all the way back up there. But now we will go back into our introductions to our fantastic guest speaker, ADHS's very own Mackenzie Toole, who's going to talk about rare diseases. So further ado, go Mackenzie.
Thank you, Brenna. I'm actually not going to talk about a lot of them, really just one in particular. But certainly if you have questions about diseases you don't see very often, we're happy to help. So I'm going to talk about Vibrio. And Vibrio has a special place in my heart because I used to live in Florida and work at the local health department in Tampa. And Vibrio is a disease that you see often on the coasts. And so Florida has a ton of Vibrio. It's very controversial, people get really up in arms and the media goes crazy. And so it's one that I've learned about that I think is really awesome. But it's also really confusing to get sometimes. So Vibrio bacteria are naturally occurring. They're something that we fully expect to see in the water. And it's not something that we could get rid of if we wanted to. So most of the time when you hear about Vibrio cases, people get it through consumption of raw oysters or through swimming, fishing, or wading in water that has Vibrio in it. Those are your two main things. So the first thing I want to clarify while I have your attention is the difference between Vibrio cholera that is toxigenic and Vibrio cholera that is non-toxigenic. So when we say toxigenic Vibrio cholera, and that looks like V cholerae, has a little E on the end, you might see that here in Arizona. This is a reason to act quickly. However, it's probably not what we call big C cholera, which is the toxigenic type of cholera. They both have the same name. They just are going to have a little thing on the end that's going to say O1 or O139, which is the indication that it's toxic and that it's actual cholera. So this type of cholera that we don't see very often, like so rare that there were 123 cases in the US from 2001 to 2013, so very, very rare, is what you hear about causing huge epidemics. Like in Haiti after the earthquake, there was a ton of cholera, like almost 800,000 people getting cholera. This is your rice water stools. This is like insane amounts of watery diarrhea. It's painless, no fever, and severe hydration is really, really common. And this is something where it can get into bodies of water if there's not good infrastructure and people are drinking the water filled with, unfortunately, cholera poop. Look at Mary Lee. So if you want to have an interesting afternoon, apparently this cholera outbreak, the UN is taking responsibility for it. So give that a Google later. You'll be really fascinated. However, that's usually not what you're going to see here. We do see non-toxigenic Vibrio cholera. And so it's in our water here. Just treat it as if it's a normal case of Vibrio and not big C cholera. However, if you have somebody who's traveled to a place where cholera is endemic, then you might want to consider it to be a possibility. The only way you can find out is by doing further testing at our state lab and ultimately at CDC. So I tell you that you should always act with urgency when you see a Vibrio case, but don't assume that it's going to be this big C cholera, which is confusing for people. It often gets put into menses wrong. Okay, but most of the time you're not going to see that, and you're going to see other types of Vibrio, and these are our non-toxigenic. These are what we would call vibriosis. There are a number of species with Vibrio. The top three that you're going to see most commonly are Parahemolyticus, Alginolyticus, and Vulnificus. Those are the top three species. There are some other ones that are less commonly seen. You've probably seen them on the forms, Mimicus, Fluvialis, and some others that I don't know how to say. And it's also possible that you could have a case of Vibrio that has multiple species in the same one. And that, again, would have to be something that most likely is going to show up at our state lab. So with this, Parahemolyticus is the most common, and Parahemolyticus is mostly foodborne. And the great news, I have a cool infographic, not available here, but we'll get it to you. Mostly foodborne. That's going to be mostly those raw oysters. It can also be undercooked oysters, clams, crab, or what they call fin fish, which when I read it, I was like, oh, that must be a type of fish that I've never heard of, but generally just means any type of fish with fins. Learn something else in this research. So when people have seafood exposure in general, that's one of the big ways that they can get it. And that is going to typically present as a GI syndrome. So it's going to be nausea, vomiting, sometimes, nausea, fever, sometimes vomiting. It wouldn't be uncommon. And the second way that people get it often is through being in water that has Vibrio in it. So Vibrio grows in warm, salty water. You're going to see the word brackish, which basically just means half fresh water, half salty water. So it really likes salt and it really likes warmth. So you're going to see most of your cases across the US from May to October. And there, even in California, there are laws against serving raw oysters at certain times of the year because of this increase in temperature really allows the Vibrio bacteria to grow. So you're either going to see these in GI, like we talked about, in wound infections, which this can be a new or existing wound. So a lot of times it's people who are on the water who cut their foot on a rock or are fishing and cut themselves, or they have an existing wound on their leg. Even things like new tattoos have been shown to get Vibrio infections. So any kind of opening on your skin, even if it's tiny, can let that bacteria in, and it can show up as a wound infection. Depending on the species you get, it can get really ugly really fast. I'll talk about that in a little bit. That's often going to be associated with Vibrio vulnificus, is this wound infection, but it doesn't always turn out that way. You may see Vibrio in the blood, meaning they have septicemia or bloodstream infection. And this can start as either ingestion and then spread to the bloodstream, or it can enter into your body through a wound and then get into the bloodstream. This is bad. When you see Vibrio in the blood, this is usually a sign that someone's in a life or death situation. So those are very scary. You can also see Vibrio in multiple ways. You can get a culture from a wound, and you can also get a culture from blood. And so that can give you an indication of what kind of exposures you're looking for, because the form you have to fill out for Vibrio is going to ask questions about ingestion when that may not be the case for that person. So you have to use these clues along the way to sort of guide your investigation. Other strange places that Vibrio can show up in your ear, a lot of times ear infections are due to Vibrio alginolyticus. So that's a common way you'll see it. Other crazy things, listen to this. One woman got a tumor infection on her ovaries because she was having sex in the Gulf of Mexico and got Vibrio in her genital, like in her female lady parts. So the bacteria can really show up just about anywhere. Are you horrified, by the way? Yeah, terrifying. So that's happened. It can get into your eye. It can get into the lining of your abdominal wall. There's just a million ways that you can get Vibrio, so it can really show up anywhere. So like I said, most of the time these are foodborne, so you can assume that someone's eaten something like a raw oyster or raw seafood. It can be through water, or it could be through contact with marine wildlife or handling raw fish. So you'll see fishermen who catch fish and then they clean the fish and then they cut their hands while they're cleaning the fish. So there's really just a multitude of ways, and you sort of have to go in understanding that it's had to have come from some sort of water or sea life and figure out from there where it comes from. So when you have cases of Vibrio, usually things like ear infections are not really going to be life-threatening. They just are people who usually have had some kind of ear surgery or ear issue, going swimming in the ocean, getting some water in their ear, and then it ends up draining and then it ends up getting cultured. But sometimes you have these really serious situations, and one of the hugest risk factors for Vibrio cases is any kind of disease of the liver. So hepatitis C is rampant. There's tons of it. And those are your folks you really need to be worried about if you see somebody who's hep C positive and has Vibrio. Or they could be hep B positive, or they could have cirrhosis, or they could simply be a heavy drinker. All things that damage your liver. And then our normal things that we consider someone immunocompromised: HIV positive, diabetic, on some kind of cancer treatment or a history of cancer or certain medications. People who have a specific blood disorder that increases the iron level in their blood. You'll see on the form that asks about blood disorders. And then any kind of changes or adjustments to the stomach, like a past stomach surgery, or something that's really, really common is people taking antacids. So anything that's going to reduce the stomach acid is going to decrease the body's ability to kill the Vibrio. So you often have people eating raw oysters and really like going on these extravagant vacations and meals and partying hard and drinking, and they're taking lots of antacids to deal with these strange foods they're eating. And it's just sort of setting them up for a gross case of Vibrio. So any questions right there before I go into Vibrio vulnificus a little bit? Doing okay, following? Okay. So I want to talk about Vibrio vulnificus because it's very rare, but it's something that I think is really cool. And we actually, at AZID this year, our conference, have a speaker from Washington coming because they had a really atypical presentation I'll tell you about in a minute. So this is the deadliest species as Vibrio vulnificus. This is the one that has, in 2014, had like an 80% hospitalization rate, 18% death rate, but it can have a case fatality rate of upwards of 50%. So it gets a lot of media attention. You may have seen things that talk about a flesh-eating bacteria that cause people to die. And the media often reports it as, oh, they were just totally healthy and then they died. And it is a very quickly moving bacteria. So it's not uncommon for folks to go fishing, get a cut on their leg, The next day, wake up, they've got a lot of what's called cellulitis, redness and sort of irritation in their leg. And they develop these blisters that are called bully, B-U-L-L-A-E. And they just are sort of these really rapidly moving infections of the leg or their hand or wherever the exposure site was, which quickly turns into sepsis, having fever, sometimes altered mental status. And then they go into the hospital and they often pass away within a few days. So it's very shocking for people. But in all of the cases I've seen of this person almost always had a liver condition, usually hepatitis C, that's really causing the problems. And so what I've figured out here is that folks with liver issues tend to have higher iron in their blood, and they tend to have lower neutrophils, which is a white blood cell type that helps fight off infection. And Vibrio grows really well in iron-rich environments. So when you get Vibrio in the blood that has high iron in it, it grows extra quick. And when you have the reduced ability to fight it off with these neutrophils, it's really this perfect storm that causes it to move so quickly and the body isn't able to fight it off. So sometimes they, if they're able to get them on the right antibiotic, they will just simply like have an amputation of that limb. But other times they do die, like I said. So Google that as well. There's lots of stories on it in the media. And so my little teaser was to tell you about the folks in Washington. They had 2 Vibrio Vulnificus cases who had no exposure to waters where we would expect to find this bacteria. So it's really heavily in the Gulf of Mexico. We wouldn't expect to see it in Washington. And it turns out that there was some farm-grown tilapia grown in Idaho that was shipped to a local Asian supermarket in Washington, and they were able to find that these folks had been cleaning the fish and had exposures to wounds and developed Vibrio Vulnificus in this situation where they totally wouldn't expect to see it. So this is pretty cool. If you want to hear more about it, I can tell you sometime, or you can come to AZID. So we kind of need to keep our eyes open for these weird things to pop up and be aware of how these exposures can happen. So to wrap it up, these are pretty rare infections, but we do see a handful of cases every year in Arizona. And individuals who are immunocompromised are going to be at highest risk, especially those liver diseases. The manifestations are pretty broad, again, so be thinking about these transmission routes, and this will help guide your interview. So if it's a stool culture, it's likely going to be a foodborne. If it is a blood culture, it's probably going to be either foodborne or a wound. If it's a wound, it means they probably were in contact with water or some kind of juices of fish or shellfish. And then it could be multiple. Because these are ones we always want to get forwarded to our state lab, and they don't come around very often, they sometimes slip under the radar. So we want all of those specimens forwarded to our state lab for confirmation. So I encourage you to always call that lab that ordered it and make sure that it gets sent over. And then all Vibrio cases require completion of a COVIS form, C-O-V-I-S. It's Cholera and Other Vibrio Illnesses Survey or something with an S, I can't remember. But it's available on the internet, and it's required to be sent to CDC within 30 days of case report. So I can work with you, and I will hound you to get it from you, but just keep in mind that that's going to be your guide for completing the investigation. And then finally, if you find that seafood or shellfish has been consumed at a restaurant, please let the food team know, because if it's locally in Arizona, you're going to have to work with your environmental health to get those restaurants inspected. Collection of shellfish tags, there's a requirement that restaurants will keep those for a while because they eventually will trace it back into the waters where those seafood were caught, and they can sort of keep a warning and keep an eye on where the Vibrio is concentrated. If it's in another state, that's really important that you let us know if somebody's traveled, because we can let that state know when they can do an inspection. Or even if it's in Mexico, which we often see folks traveling to Mexico and getting that. If we have a name of a restaurant, we can give that over to Sonora for them to inspect. Unfortunately, a lot of people will say, oh, I went to the fish market in Rocky Point, which we can't really do anything about. but it is useful for us to let other people know where we think it's coming from, because it at least can get a little bit ahead. Like I said, we can't really get rid of it, but you can sort of guide the shellfish sanitation people to let them know where the cases are coming from. That's all I have as far as notes. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts?
Mary Lee,
Well, I just had a brief comment that I think this is one example of many where foodborne world crosses into acquired through other ways world, and that's the whole One Health thing, that it can come from food, it can come from our environment, it can come from animals, it can come from other people. And then just also wanted to ask Mackenzie, what is a investigator's role in getting specimens for a case of Vibrio to the state lab? Do we want them following up on all of those, or is that happening on its own? What's an investigator's role there?
Great question, Mary Lee. That felt very much like I was on a TV interview. So it is something that is required, and under our lab reporting laws, they're supposed to send it. As we know, it's an imperfect system. And I think routine diseases like salmonella are regular sent. So when I was an investigator, I would call, if it's a hospital or say Sonora Quest, I would call them and say, hey, we received a positive Vibrio case for so-and-so. Can you please make sure that gets sent to our state lab? Oftentimes you'll have to give them the address and information. Always a good idea to get that person's name, whoever you talk to, and note that in the case that you did call to have that forwarded. Now, much of these are going to be positive from culture independent diagnostic tests, or CIDT, like our biofires and our GI panels. And those do not always confirm out. Once they get to the state lab, they're then cultured, and they're not always positive. But we still want to investigate it as if it is going to be confirmed. But really making sure that they get there is important, because that data is useful for the state as well as for CDC to have a look at all the other states.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Mackenzie. I will just pause on any questions for Mackenzie right now. You can all think about them and ruminate on that fantastic knowledge of Vibrio we all just gained. And I'm actually going to turn it now to Lisa, who's going to be presenting on her case investigation. She has graciously accepted our, our invitation to do so. So Lisa, if you want to go ahead and take charge now.
So do you want me to just go off of the form, follow the format on there that I sent in yesterday?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay, so this was a case of a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old that were co-infected with Salmonella and Giardia. It ended up being a difficult case because it was also a CPS case where the children had been removed from the home. There was a daycare involved, and then there was a foster family that was also involved that had other children, young children, and I think a total of 7 children living in the foster home, 2 others that were under age 5 in diapers, and then of course the daycare. So we received the report from our local hospital on the positive cases, and then trying to, of course, at the hospital, you get home address, home phone number, and all that information. So then trying to track the children down, we were able to find out they had been removed by CPS and placed in the foster home. Normally what we would do is contact a parent and find out what the food history is, any possible ways they could have contracted the diseases, especially having the co-infection. And there was no way to get a hold of the family. Actually, they had been arrested. So we had to get a hold of CPS, and CPS is very protective of their children. So you have to prove who you are and why you need this information before you can get a hold of foster care family or even be given the information on the foster care family. So we had to work through that first of all and kind of gain that trust with CPS, and then get a hold of the foster family to let them know what was going on, work with the foster family to make sure that they knew the precautions to take as far as diaper changes. These kids were so sick. They had actually been taken to the ER, and that's where the stool samples were collected. So they had watery diarrhea, just every imaginable symptom, and they were quite malnourished as well. So we found out that they were going to a daycare as well. And in the daycare, diaper changes, severe diarrhea, and trying to educate the daycare center about cleaning and hand washing. There were several other children that were in the baby's room or in the same room that these kids were in. So we had to do that. They actually closed down the daycare center for a day so that they could clean the entire daycare center to make sure that, you know, that was taken. And then they started monitoring all the children and staff in the daycare center to make sure they did not become symptomatic. As far as the children go, we ended up finding out that they were, the situation that they were found in, that was pretty bad. They were living kind of like dogs. So they were eating out of the dog food dishes, drinking out of the dog's water on the floor. There was animal and human feces on the floor. So we didn't really have to go too much further to figure out that this is probably where the infection came from, is that the lifestyle that they were living in. So, but what made it really difficult is trying to get that information. That took a few days just to even get that information. And then we had to follow up to get more stool samples from the kids to make sure that they had cleared the infections before they could go back to daycare. We had to continue to monitor the kids in the daycare, the staff in the daycare, and then the children in the foster home. Because when the children were placed, they weren't aware that they were infected. So monitoring the other children in the daycare or the foster home, educating them on cleaning, on hand washing, getting the follow-up doctor's appointments, the follow-up stool samples to make sure that everything had cleared and that they were actually getting better and not worse. So it was just it was a bad situation because of the way that they were living, but our normal avenues of investigation, contacting parents, finding out what they ate, being able to follow food sources, and that was not possible. Having to deal with CPS and, you know, to even get more information, and then dealing with the foster family and the daycare. So the investigation probably went on for over a month just because we continued to follow through with the daycare center and the foster family and make sure that they, you know, the kids were better and that there was no extent. And fortunately, there was no secondary cases outside of these two, whether either in the foster home or in the daycare. So everybody was really on board with it, and they followed all the instructions that we gave them as far as cleaning and that. So, you know, as bad as it was, it ended up working out really well, and everybody was, you know, kind of played well together on this one. But it was kind of a sad situation to deal with.
Yeah, no, that does sound like a very sad and tough situation. But I do want to commend you on your follow through and perseverance with getting through all those different agencies, dealing with CPS and then the foster family and then the daycare. That shows a lot of resilience on your part. Did you have any questions you wanted to pose to the group related to your case or other cases, other tough situations?
I don't think so. I think we just followed our normal protocols. We looked up the investigation forms. We followed the statutes and that on what we needed to do. And, you know, fortunately, everybody played well together. I think it could have gotten the other way if CPS had not been on board, because there's been other cases where they refused to give us information on the foster family just because it's so protected. They won't give you information on the families, you know, parents, you can't contact them. So it could have gone the other way, as it has in other cases where we just could not get any contact. You know, fortunately, we made it very clear it was a very serious situation. And, you know, with the daycare, the foster family, the other kids, that it was, you know, in their best interest to let us in on, you know, to contact the foster families. So it actually worked out really well.
Yeah, that sounds like
I
it.
have a question for Lisa. How did you find out the kids were in foster care? Was it in the medical records from when they took the specimens?
Yeah, once we got the report through the regular avenues, through the infection control practitioner at the hospital, reported it, and then what we normally do is, we request all the records, and by the time we got the records, it was in the discharge summary that they had been placed with a foster family. So it didn't say who the foster family was because that's protected information. So then you have to contact CPS and say, hey, we're aware of these children, they're sick, they're with a foster family, and we need to get a hold of them. And then you have to show all your credentials and your reasoning for doing this and, kind of prove your case to CPS. And once we did that, once we had the medical records, that's how we found out that they were, had been removed from the home.
Okay. Does anyone in the group have any questions for Lisa about her case?
I have a question just for everyone. Has anybody run into sort of issues with other agencies trying to get or share information and people being protective of that sort of data?
I think we have issues with Nevada because we share other than having issues with Nevada, but we get a lot of reports from Southern Nevada Health District, and we have our request for medical records, which is an Arizona revised statute. So when we send it to Nevada, they don't recognize it as that they have to give us information because it's Nevada, not Arizona law. So it's probably 50% of the time that we cannot get any records from Nevada physicians or hospitals to back up our cases.
Well, let us help you with that. Email us if you have that problem and we can get in touch with someone.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I actually have a question for Lisa. So I know you mentioned that you've had other cases where CPS hasn't been so cooperative with you. But what strategy did you employ this time to make them so cooperative or willing to provide that information?
Basically, I got a hold of a supervisor because I didn't know who the caseworker was. So I went just straight to the top and explained to them, who I was and the reason that I was doing this investigation and why it was so important to get a hold of the family and that there was a chance for secondary spread within the daycare center or wherever these kids were at that point. We didn't know that they were in daycare, but I just made my point that it was really, really important and could be dangerous to the other families that they were around. And the supervisor was great. They had to have their records and, proof of, who I was and all of that information. But it didn't take them long to come around and they were able to contact us with the foster family information. So I just went straight to the top. I didn't even, start below that, which to me, that's kind of where you have to if you're dealing with CPS, because it depends on if you just talk to the person at the front desk, their standard reaction is, I can't share that information with you. So I just kind of bypassed everybody.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Lisa? Or I will even say any other questions for Mackenzie regarding Vibrio or other rare diseases that they may have run across. What about if none, everyone knows where the Covis form is or any other special forms that sometimes those other diseases sometimes need? Does everyone know where those are or have questions about filling those out?
Does everyone know what diseases require those special forms? Let's back up a little. So I'll actually just preemptively talk about what we were going to say for our MedSys special section today. Like I said, Vibrio and Cholera have a special form. It's called the Covis form. That has to be given back to CDC within 30 days. of report. And all of these forms are on the ADHS website, or you can also email us and we can get you a copy of it. The other diseases that require a special form outside of the DSO is listeria. That one is about a 14-page interview that's going to ask about grocery stores and restaurants and shopper card records and specific food items that are really common with listeria. That is a really quick turnaround. That has to be sent back to CDC in 7 days. So that means if you see a listeria come across your desk, you need to act immediately. It's one of those really high-profile diseases. And then finally, if you have a case of typhoid fever or paratyphoid fever, that requires a special CDC form. Typhoid fever is pretty easily found. Paratyphoid fever is going to be one of those that may require some additional testing, and you may investigate it as a normal salmonella case, but it shows up later to be paratyphoid fever. Maybe, maybe not. But the important thing is with all these forms is that we get that to CDC in a timely fashion, but it also is required that you fill out the DSO with the information you collected, and that sounds really annoying and really silly, but that is something that we ask, is that those 3 diseases are going to be ones that require some double data entry. And if you ever have questions on how to fill out the forms, we can help you with that. I also want to share, here's our cool MedSys point. So you're often going to see on forms, and this will be on those special forms, as well as questionnaires for outbreaks, like our National Hypothesis Generating Questionnaire. You're going to see a line that's going to ask you for the PulseNet ID. Have you all seen this, heard of this? Yeah, maybe. Anyone that hasn't worked at the state seen what I'm talking about? PulseNet ID? Just shake your head. Okay, great. So that is really easily found in MedSys. That is our state lab ID, and that is going to be AZ000 and 5 numbers. So when you see that, that is your PulseNet ID. That's how we communicate with CDC. They don't have MedSys, so we have to use these lab IDs, and our lab communicates with a database called PulseNet, and that's how they get that. So please fill that in if you can, and then typically it's going to ask you for a state or local ID, and that's going to be our MedSys number. So now you can feel empowered to fill that in yourself. Please tell all your friends. It's really, really helpful when that gets filled out. Any other questions? Forms are thrilling, aren't they?
It wouldn't be government without some, paperwork talk. All right. Any other questions about anything we've talked about today?
Can you guys hear us? It's echoing. Hey, I have a question for Mackenzie.
Sure. Anna, Kayla, and Katie, can you mute your computer and your Zoom if you're still on by phone?
Was that Coconino County talking and we're not hearing anything? You can also type your question if that works for you.
I think that was Maricopa County, and they're both on the phone and on the computer, so I think that's the reason that there was some feedback.
Mary Lee, Maricopa, Anna, Kayla, and Katie?
Yes, that's Maricopa.
Okay. I think that's what happened, yeah.
So good question. They asked, do you find that CIDT specimens typically have isolates sent to ADHS? So when we're talking about getting specimens forwarded, it's a little bit confusing. Culture is the only thing that yields an isolate. And prior to 2018, in January, only isolates required to be forwarded. So that meant if somebody tested something with a CIDT, like a biofire, a GI panel, that wasn't required to be sent to the state lab. However, now our rules say that isolates, which are from cultures, or clinical material are all required to be sent to our state lab. So that includes those CIDTs. Our lab is so awesome. They have been taking all these CIDTs and then culturing it so that they can test the isolate. Now, an isolate is the only way that we can get further information from a specimen. So that's the only way we can get the species and really confirm and say, yes, this is for sure this bacteria. So labs are supposed to forward Vibrio specimens on their own without us having to call. But a lot of times they don't know or they forget, and we have to remind them. So it's really routine and normal for labs to hear from us, for us to say, hey, please forward this, please make sure this gets forwarded. So those ones we don't see very often, Listeria and Vibrio, are really important to get those specimens to the lab, and they don't always make it there. So when in any doubt, always call the lab and make sure that's forwarded. And your question, is serotyping for Salmonella from culture or CIDT? It is from a culture, because we have to have an isolate to do serotyping. And a CIDT is just going to leave us with what we call that clinical material. And so, like I said, our lab can take a CIDT, the clinical material, culture it to get an isolate to go on for serotyping. But this is one of the big problems we have with CIDTs now, is if they stand alone, they don't let us do any serotyping. They don't let us get any sort of DNA information to show matches and to give us additional information. They just are that screening test. And if they're not sent on, that's all they are. We can't connect the dots anywhere. We don't have any way to say, hey, I think this Vibrio matches this Vibrio, or this Listeria matches this one. It's just standalone. So that's why it's really important. Lisa said, how long is the specimen good for? It depends on the organism. It depends on the organism and how long it has to get into the media. I'm going to let Brenna answer that one. Brenna, can you take it away?
Yeah, hi, hello. So depending on how the lab will identified whatever it was, let's just say they do have a biofire. And so with the biofire, they have a stool sample, they have this poop, they put in basically this magic box. They don't have to do anything with it. They just put the poop in the magic box and it spits out an answer. Ideally, hopefully, they should then take that poop that's not in any preservative or anything, put it in preservative, so that bacteria that may have been in there, hopefully that will make it happy. It's kind of like Jell-O, and they can like eat it and they're happy and they're content and they're like, cool. That will usually last about 5 days, sometimes a week, if it's a pretty hardy bacteria like Salmonella. Vibrio, Shigella, they're kind of wimps. They don't always like even that Jell-O. They're very particular about their Jell-O flavor, and so they don't always make it. So sometimes if everything is followed within a proper amount of time, it's a good thing that, the state lab should have a good recovery, but that's also why, sometimes it doesn't make it because of that. And I will go ahead and answer Maricopa's question about how long does it take to get the state lab confirmatory testing for Vibrio. That is going to depend on how they receive the specimen. If they receive just the raw material, they first have to then culture it and get that isolate. So that can take a day or two, depending on when they get that sample in. From there, if they do find Vibrio, that can take, again, about a week or so. So it can take a little while, just depending. If it comes in as an isolate of Vibrio, that can speed things up. But because we are taking, any clinical material now, really to encourage labs to send us these CIDTs, that can add a little bit more time. But if you have questions about that, we can always look that up for you to see if it's made it, or if, what the timing is. Does that answer everyone's question? Sorry,
I just had one more thought on that vein. We do not want you to wait for confirmatory testing at our state lab before investigating. We want you to act quickly on the lab result that you've received, because it still is going to meet the case definition of whatever you've received originally, even if it's negative at our state lab. So that's important to not wait on our lab, because sometimes they get backed up and things doesn't come in a timely manner. And we have to remember that memory is, every day we wait, we're losing a little bit more memory. Good questions, though. Really good questions.
Okay, any final questions about anything today, or even not related to today, future thoughts? I will say that since we have quite a few of the case investigations, if anybody wants to volunteer for the next couple weeks, please let us know, or otherwise we may just volunteer some people, but nicely, of course. Any other final thoughts before we end today? Okay. Well, it is just about time. So I will remind everyone that we will meet here again next week, same time, same place. So thank you all, of course, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll send out notes and things after this meeting. So feel free again, if anyone has any questions at any time about anything, you can always email the food team at food@azdhs.gov. So thank you all. Oh,
sorry.
Yes. No, that's okay.
I have a question on the presenting. Does it have to be a recent one?
No, it could be anyone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because we did have one that was a typhoid that we found out it was last year, so we were thinking maybe presenting it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So if you guys want to just think about that, maybe come up with some other questions or fill out the form or whatever, just know it. We can talk about that next week.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll put you down as volunteers already for next week.
Okay.
All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week then. Bye.
Bye.